to the people of Tobago, Trinidad, the Caribbean, the wider world. I am Watson Solomon Duke, political leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, and I'm speaking from our PDP headquarters at the Port Mall, Scarborough, Tobago. Last evening, Tobagonians gathered around their television, around their phones, tablets, computers, whatever they have, to listen to our Chief Secretary speak on Tobago's autonomy. Tobago's autonomy has been an issue that is now in the public domain, and it is an issue of great importance to the political leadership in Trinidad, called the PNM, which is the head of the government, and also the opposition in Trinidad. Somehow it has taken root in Tobago because Tobago is the subject matter, Tobago's autonomy. I want to be quite clear that Tobagonians are very much interested in their future. And I say future, not autonomy. Tobagonians are very much interested in their day-to-day living experience. And the PNM, who holds the majority of the government seats in Trinidad, placed before us an amendment to the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago and a Tobago government bill before us, stating that you are going to get more money if you support this bill. You are going to get more authority as an executive group in Tobago, whereby you can make laws if you support this bill. You are going to get more miles in the sea if you support this bill. And so Tobagonians are discussing the issue. As one who is known for being the highways and the byways of Tobago, I've been collecting ideas from Tobagonians. And as a representative of the people for quite a long time, starting off as representing workers and then representing Tobago as an island, I can say to you, oftentimes people know what they want, but lack the ability to express what they want, how they want to. And so they come to representatives to say to us, please help me to say this better. And so for quite a long time, I have been stressing Tobagonians do not want autonomy. They do not want autonomy because autonomy promises us some of our rights. What Tobagonians want is self-determination, which guarantees Tobago all of our rights. So here we come back to last night now. Tobagonians gathered around their television set, around their iPads, their phones, their computers to listen to the Chief Secretary, the one who ought to be representing all of Tobago, coming to say to us that Tobago wants self-determination, Tobago wants autonomy. The conflating of self-determination with autonomy is something that confuses the issue and lower the value of Tobagonians in the eyes of Trinidadians and the wider Caribbean. Tobago does not want autonomy. Autonomy represents a choice that the people make by saying we want some of our rights and not all of our rights. That is not a choice Tobagonians are making at this point in time. Tobagonian does not want some of their rights. Tobagonians want all of their rights to decide. All. A-L-L. All of their rights. I listened to the Chief Secretary and I felt as if the Chief Secretary lacked a clear strategy as to how Tobago will position itself in the Trinidad and Tobago argument. I listened to him using a lot of our past leaders, APT James, A.N.R. Robinson, and Hojoy Charles. He used them as crutches, as if to say he is now the Messiah on the sea. The others have died, and he has now come to fulfill that which was promised by APT James, A.N.R. Robinson, and Hojoy Charles. But allow me to make it absolutely clear today that neither APT James, A.N.R. Robinson, nor Hojoy Charles fought for self-determination. What they fought for was more rights for Tobago. They did not fight for self-determination. It is the first time in the history of Tobago, Tobagonians are dealing with the issue self-determination. Self-determination is not secession. Self-determination is a cardinal principle rooted in international law. It is based on the United Nations Conventions and many other laws around the world that says the people who have been held in subjugation, who have been held in an inferior position to colonial powers, those in Europe, in this case, British Empire, they have a right among themselves to determine for themselves their political status. That's one. And their social, economic, and cultural development. That's 4 things. So self-determination guarantees 4 things. I want to teach a little bit this morning. Beat and teach. Self-determination speaks to a people in Tobago, the people in Tobago, among themselves, by themselves, with no external influence whatsoever. Not from Trinidad, not from the Caribbean, not from America, from no outside influence. They must decide their political status. They must decide their economic, social, and cultural development. Those are the 4 things. Let me pull aside and deal with our political status. The political status of Tobago can either be 1, an independent country. Tobago can decide by itself to become an independent country, raise its own flag, create its own national anthem, its own national bird or animal of identity. We can decide that. We can decide to go to United Nations with our head representing us there. We can decide to enter the World Cup, as how Grenada and all Jamaica and these countries do it. That's one choice of your political status. There are 2 more choices you have when coming to your political status. The next one is to have an interdependent status, as we now have with Trinidad, where we are interdependent with Trinidad. Partly rights, partly we don't have rights. That's what we have with Trinidad right now. Interdependent. So autonomy is a part of its status. It is not self-determination. I wish to remind Fali that autonomy is not self-determination. Autonomy is an aspect to political status. All right? It is not self-determination. Autonomy is one of the choosing you have when you're talking political status. The first one is independence. The second one is autonomy, which is you have a type of interdependent relationship with the country with which you are in. That's autonomy. And there are various forms of autonomy which we wouldn't get into at this point in time. But the third status is that of an association. You can remain independent, as how Grenada and St. Vincent and Grenada and St. Vincent is. They form an association with the Eastern Caribbean dollar. All right? The EC. We have the European nations, all of them are independent. But when we talk about the European Union, That is the European nations coming together under an umbrella called the European Union. None of them is superior to the other one. All of them are equal in that union. And if they make a law in the European Union, it will affect those who agree to it. If you do not agree with the law, then it does not affect you. Trinidad and Tobago can also have an association. But to just come to Tobagonians with his bold, uneducated self and to say to Tobagonians that self-determination, autonomy, you are not speaking clearly to Tobagonians. You must speak clearly. The issue must not be conflated. It must not be confused. Again, self-determination deals with four things. 1, political status. 2, economic development, social development, and cultural development. Those are the four things. Your political status can be either of three things. 1, independent. 2, you have autonomy, which is part of a kind of an interdependent type of relationship which we have with Trinidad. Or the third one, you can have an association, as the European Union have an association, and they have shared laws and shared money, etc. That is an association. No one could bully the next one. They all appear before the United Nations in their own right. Does Tobago want to be independent? Does Tobago want autonomy, some of our rights? Or does Tobago want an association with Trinidad where we share the dollar and where we share laws that we agree to? That is a question for Tobago to decide. And Tobago must decide that among its own people by itself with no external influence. After a long-winded speech that meant nothing to nobody except himself, where he used history as if he was a student of history, calling on Belmana riot as if he knew of Belmana riot, and trying to explain to Tobagonians as if he knew how we get there, he ended up by saying that he will commission Winford James and Miss Melville, a lawyer, to create school books. All of us now, school books to send to school to teach children about it. And you could have a big campaign on this self-determination / autonomy issue. Those are wrong ideas. And I want to say to Winford James and Miss Melville, Tobago is not a plaything. We are more intelligent now. Tobago is not a plaything. When you all step into Tobago and step properly, because we will not sit down and allow anybody to tell us what we want. When Tobagonians know what they want, is that full right to decide. And we must decide. However, the Chief Secretary has never allowed Tobago to decide. In 2021, while he was still a member of the PDP, the Chief Secretary secretly signed a document with Hochoy Charles and sent it to Trinidad. I never knew of that document. So much for transparency, but the Chief Secretary is concerned. Secretly signing a document with Hochoy Charles and sending it to Trinidad representing Tobago view. Where was his political leader? Where was the PDP view on that matter? He signed it and he speaks of it as if it was a good view. Do not use those views as Tobago view. Earlier this year, while being interviewed by Tobago Updates, journalists, we don't call their name, he said that he has prepared a document that is slightly different from the one that he sent down to Trinidad, but he prepared that document as Chief Secretary. That's January of this year. And he's going to send that document to all the MPs, just in case the document comes up for Tobago's autonomy. He is going to let them know what Tobago wants. Again, that is not proper. It is not good governance. It lacks transparency. How could you take a government, Tobago House of Assembly as we call it, rubbish our ideas, create your own document, send it down to Trinidad without us even discussing the document or even having a view on that document. I want to say clearly to Father today, do not play with Tobagonians. Do not take Tobagonians for a joyride. We are not on any joyride with you. Tobagonians are fed up and ready for our self-determination. You created a document in January. You claim to have dished it out to all the MPs, but the Tobago House of Assembly assemblymen have not received a copy of that document. You say go on down to Trinidad to talk to them. You're going to Trinidad to talk to them. And the people in Tobago are totally unaware of what is inside the document. So much for transparency. So much for transparency. I want to further say that Farley lacks the historical knowledge of Tobago and Tobago's quest for autonomy. Therefore, as the Chief Secretary, he's relying upon people as a layman is relying upon crutches. His entire speech last night was written for him. His entire speech, every is, every are, every comma, every exclamation mark was written for him. I saw him swaying like a leaf in the tree, trying to read. It lacks authenticity. It lacks the commitment that Tobagonians want to see in their leadership. If you are unaware and ill-informed as to what Tobago wants, how can we trust you? How can we trust you to lead Tobago forward? In 2023, he said in the Tobago House of Assembly that he is now responsible for Tobago's autonomy. The truth is he's not responsible. He's relying upon what they tell him. And so for all his life, he has spoken about autonomy, autonomy, autonomy. However, last night, he shocked Tobago, speaking the language I've been speaking for years, self-determination, self-determination. APT James didn't talk self-determination. They talk autonomy, some of their rights. A.N.R. Robinson did not speak of self-determination. They spoke of some of their rights. Ho-Choi Charles did not speak of self-determination, but some of Tobago rights. And all of them, I am saying today, and I want it not to be misunderstood, Tobago, among Tobagonians, must decide what we want. And to decide what we want to look at all the three options available to us. Tobago must look and see whether or not to be an independent country is the best fit. They must consider that option with all the information, all the benefits, and all the demerits of being an independent country. Tobago must decide whether it wants to continue with autonomy and have some more rights with Trinidad. They must look at the benefits and the demerits. Finally, Tobago must consider whether it wants to be in an association with Trinidad or any other Caribbean country within the Caribbean. Thereby, sharing with them a dollar, sharing with them security issues, whatever we choose to share with them, Tobago must decide that. But more than anything else, Tobago must decide whether we are going to depend on a Trinidad Parliament to give us the constitutional changes we desire, or we are going to ask for some low-hanging fruits, which the government of Trinidad and Tobago can treat with. Let me clarify that. Tobago must decide whether they will wait until never morning for a 2/3 parliamentary agreement at the lower house, at the higher house, to determine whether or not they get into the constitution the things they want, or whether we can start affecting the simple majority laws that affect our day-to-day living. Let me break it down further. In 1887, Queen Victoria was given the right by the Parliament of England called Trinidad and Tobago Act, 1887. Trinidad and Tobago Act enabled Queen Victoria to do two things. One, to unify the colony of Tobago and to unify the colony of Trinidad. That's one. And secondly, to determine at a time suitable to her by an order in council to determine the terms and conditions of the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago. I don't want Tobago to miss those two things. I'm teaching this morning, and I'm not reading any script. In 1887, September the 16th of 1887, Queen Victoria was given a mandate by the Parliament of Great Britain to enable her, via the Trinidad and Tobago Act, to unify the colony of Tobago, which was separate, and the colony of Trinidad, which was separate, to unify them. And having unified them, to do one thing else, to determine by an order in council the terms and conditions by which Tobago and Trinidad would exist. An order in council is like a privy council meeting where she will meet with a few persons from the privy council and they would decide. And having decided that, she would then come back to the British Parliament, the lower and the upper house, and tell them, this is what I decide. They place the power of Tobago's future and Trinidad's future in her hands. So in 1898, mark that second date, in 1898, Queen Victoria then decided by order in council to say exactly what and how the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago should be managed. I think, and I cringe, what would have led Queen Victoria to place Tobago, which had been an island under the old representative system, the old parliamentary system, where we elected people, what would have caused Queen Victoria to place Tobago as a ward into the hands of Trinidad and Tobago? I've said a lot in that one statement. Allow me to break it down. The first thing they did was to form one colony. In 1887, Trinidad and Tobago. In 1898, Queen Victoria then went into Trinidad and Tobago and excised, pulled out Tobago from Trinidad and Tobago and make Tobago a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. It's an oxymoron. It's an abnormality. You cannot create Trinidad and Tobago and then pull Tobago out and make Tobago a ward of Trinidad and Tobago. There's a reason for that. When Trinidad and Tobago Act was formed in 1887, and I beg the others to challenge me on this. That's why I said they don't know what they are teaching, they don't know what they are doing. And I stand by my words on that. They cannot confuse me on that. A lot of people going around about autonomy. They don't know what they are teaching. They are simply students in school. When they formed the Trinidad and Tobago Act in 1887, we were joined. And that came into being in 1889. Mark the dates are confusing. In 1889, it took effect. Trinidad and Tobago. They became one. Right? One country. So as the Trinidad and Tobago Act took effect in 1889. So in 1898, don't get confused, in 1898, when the Queen, by an order in council, a few privy council persons sat and they met, and they made Tobago a ward of Trinidad and Tobago, they were saying one thing, that it was simply an amendment to the Trinidad and Tobago Act whereby Tobago now become a ward of itself. It's an oxymoron and abnormality. It has never happened in the entire world. It's the only place in the world where this has happened, where Trinidad and Tobago was formed and Tobago became a ward of itself. You see, Tobago is not Carrera Island. It's not Monrepos Island. It is not Sugarloaf. It's not Goat Island. Tobago is an island by itself with its own cultural, historical identity. However, for purposes best known to the Queen, we became a ward. Therein, Tobago, therein lies our problem. Being a ward to Trinidad lies our problem. When Trinidad and Tobago, which is primarily Trinidad and Tobago is primarily Trinidad, yeah? There is no place legally by law defined as Trinidad. I want to repeat that. There is no place by law in this country that defines Trinidad as Trinidad. There is Trinidad and Tobago, and then there is a ward called Tobago. Again, there's a country called Trinidad and Tobago, and there's a ward called Tobago. I hope you all understand this, journalists, out there clearly. Tobago finds itself in a funny position, a position which should have been cured at independence. But when the PNM and the other party went to England, they went for the independence of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the country, not the ward. Understand our problem? Not the ward. When later on in 1976, we got a Republican constitution, we cast off restraint and said, look, we no longer want the Queen to be the final arbiter of our problems here. We will now govern ourselves as a Republican nation. That should have been corrected there also. But it was Trinidad and Tobago, the country, that got Republican status. Tobago remains a ward of Trinidad. When BP searching a deep water block for gas off Charleville, and they found Calypso, yeah, the particle Calypso well, which has about 3.9 trillion cubic feet of gas in it. There is no gas find in Trinidad that has as much gas as that. 3.9 trillion cubic feet of gas. They refer to it as 220 kilometers north of Trinidad. Because Tobago is defined as landmass and 6 nautical miles of sea around it from the low water mark. Tobago is defined as that. Trinidad is undefined because legally Trinidad is Trinidad and Tobago. And so people are right. As it is right now, Tobago has no gas or oil within its waters. It is in the waters of Trinidad and Tobago. And the monetizing of that is the responsibility of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. How do we fix it? To fix that problem, we will have to go back to A and B. We will have to look at the laws that was created on the 16th of September 1887, the Trinidad and Tobago Act. We must repeal that act and replace it with a modern day Trinidad and Tobago Act. I wish to repeat. The Trinidad and Tobago Act of 1887, that Colonial Act, must be repealed and be replaced with a modern act that truly defines Trinidad and Tobago, not as a ward, but as one. To deal with the act is to deal with all of the amendments that flows from the act. So therefore, if you deal with the act of 1887, you would have dealt with the status of being a ward. You would have dealt with the subservient attitude of Tobagonians to Trinidadians, or Trinidad and Tobagonians. Tobago will have finally found its place in the sun, and we would have finally got the things that we wanted. which is to be treated equally with Trinidad. And when we say of Trinidad and Tobago, it is Trinidad and Tobago and no ward included. This is the quest for Tobagonians. Anything short of that is a sellout and a cop-out. And I beg my dear good Chief Secretary to please spend some time learning what Tobago wants. Stop flying all about the place. Hot foot. Hot foot. Stop deceiving Tobagonians and deceiving the world that you know what you are saying. You do not know what you are saying. You do not know what you are saying. You are speaking by guess and off of hot air. This issue is an issue I'm passionate about, as many Tobagonians are passionate about. They must be given the 3 options, and all of the options must be discussed with full transparency. 1, whether we want to be independent. That must be discussed on the table. Don't come to us and ask us what type of autonomy we want. That's only part of it. As I said, there are 3 positions: independence, autonomy, which can take different forms, yeah? And you have an association, 3 forms. I now pause for questioning.
What, in your opinion, out of those 3 do you think that Tobago wants?
I think Tobago will settle for an association which gives us our independent status, and our independent status will then link us to whichever Caribbean country we wish to share some similarities with. In this case, I think we can have an association with Trinidad, yes, and thus we can share the same dollar with them. We can share the resources in our waters with them, but it's a shared resources, all right? Because they have the technology to develop it down there, and we are not too mindful as to who developed the resources, but what we are mindful of is how the money is spread, all right? So we say share the dollar, and we could share our economic development with them. So what they have, we do not have to duplicate in Tobago. But what we have, they do not have to duplicate. That is what and how nations exist in the world today. We do not have to compete against each other. All right? And then we can share security. We can share security. Yeah? National security issues can be shared among us. So I'm talking about economic issues can be shared. National security issue can be shared. Yeah? Those are 2 of the main things we can share, and the dollar. But insofar as developing our space, Tobagonians must be able to develop our space. And let me bring this a little more clear to you. It means, therefore, with an association, when we go to the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament in Trinidad, it is no longer 39 seats to 2. It is now a Trinidad Parliament and a Tobago Parliament locked up in one, called Trinidad and Tobago Parliament. I want you to listen to this carefully. It means, therefore, that any Trinidad and Tobago bill that is passed that doesn't have our votes on it is not a bill for Trinidad and Tobago, but rather a Trinidad bill. Yeah? And it means that Tobago will continue to make bills for Tobago, and we cannot impose any bill on Trinidad. It may mean that because we have national security issues and we have economic issues joined together because we have certain resources in our marine space, we can therefore join together and create legislation around those issues. And we can govern together. But Tobago must not be dominated by the large seats in the parliament in Trinidad. It's a very important question. Any further question? Yeah.
But could you share what is the PDP's view on those decisions and those plans that the Chief Secretary had?
Frankly speaking, I don't think that Ingrid Melville and Woodford James are in any position to lead anything in Tobago. All right? They can be part of the discussions, but they are not in any position to lead anything in Tobago. This issue must be led by the Chief Secretary and the Assemblymen. I want to repeat, Ingrid Melville and Winford James and the others, they have no place in leading this matter in Tobago. It must be a matter where the Chief Secretary and the entire Assembly, all 15 of us, go out to all of the communities and constituencies and engage Tobagonians. We don't want any paid or played people to get involved in this issue. It must be where the leaders themselves come down on the ground and engage Tobagonians in exercising their options: independence, autonomy, or an association with Trinidad, which means we retain our rights, Trinidad retain their rights, but we can share our rights on matters of mutual interest. Any further questions? Well, I want to thank you all. I know I'm usually clear, and I know the public out there is listening. Please, please, I beg you, please, do not let the little boy lead you astray. He does not know what he's doing. He's meddling in something way above him. Again, Winford James and Ingrid Melville, both are my families, both are my families, proper family too. All right? They are in no position to lead Tobago's self-determination. They can be participants. This must be led by the Chief Secretary. If he's able to man up and gird up his loins and face Tobagonians, whereby we go out as an assembly to listen to the people. Time must be made for this. Thank you very much. Thank you.